And welcome back to Open Line. Tonight we are talking about the voting rights bill. We want to thank everyone who has already called in. We're about halfway through our program, so there's still plenty of time to give us a call if you're interested in sharing your thoughts and opinions. That phone number will stay at the bottom of your screen, so give us a call. We want to get back to the phones as we bring in Dr. John Vile from MTSU, our expert this evening. And let's get back to the phones with Carolyn. Thanks for holding, Carolyn. You're live on Open Line.
Thank you. My question is, will real IDs be required to vote in future elections, and if so, when?
Thank you for calling. Were you able to hear that? Real IDs.
Is she asked when they're available?
Will they be required for voting? Yeah, I suppose, and when they will be available as well.
I think they have been for several years in Tennessee. I'm sorry that I'm not a little bit more up to date on that. Certainly, it would be the prudent thing to have some identification. And I think generally they want it to be government issued. I know in some states, and Tennessee may be among them, there was discussion as to whether you could use student IDs. And I think the answer was no. Needed to be something, more like a driver's license. And again, I think Taylor was correct earlier that, now again, it's more inconvenient if you can't drive or you're elderly or whatever to get it. But I think if you don't have a driver's license, I think you can request that the state give you an ID that other than a license.
And then the additional, I guess it was an additional mark or whatnot you had to get on the ID that was delayed because of the pandemic. I'm not sure what the status of that is either now, because I know it was pushed back.
Right. I'm not sure on the timing of that. A lot. In some ways, what's interesting about this is no matter what the regulations are, if a race is really intense, both sides are going to get their people out one way or the other. It's going to be harder, probably more for Democrats and Republicans as some of these restrictions are there. But Democrats were particularly effective, and particularly in Georgia in the two Senate races that occurred after the presidential election. Not only did Georgia elect elect Biden over Trump, but they also ended up electing two Democratic senators.
And you mentioned earlier, as the kind of voting rights bill is now in limbo, the role the midterm elections could potentially be playing in this, and it's kind of caught in the middle. It's a big issue for Democrats. They probably would want to run on, but at the same time, as those seats may potentially change in the midterms, that could impact the outcome, right? If it comes back again.
And probably 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, the party in power loses Senate seats in midterm elections. And so, and it's not, even with the majority they have right now, it's not been very easy going. So, and which I guess could then push it as an issue in the next presidential election. The problem is, of course, with any single issue, other people are going to be voting on, what's going to happen in the abortion field, what's going to happen in Ukraine. And particularly, I think, elections often center on pocketbooks. We're going to continue to have high inflation. Is unemployment going to be low? What's going to happen to wages? And so there's so many things that are mixed in the pot that probably very few people go and vote exclusively on the basis of voting rights.
I'm going to go back to the phones here. Shirley, you are live on Open Line. Go ahead. Can you hear us?
Is that for me?
Yes, go ahead, ma'am. You are live on Open Line.
Okay. In the 2020 election, there was some accusations of many dead people being sent out ballots. And I called my local registrar's office and asked him how he did that. And he goes with the newspaper announcements. The obituaries tell when the person dies. And when he sees that obituary, he goes ahead and purges his voters' registration so that they won't be sent a ballot. And I really think some of the states where they don't do that should set up a law that makes them get rid of the voters' registration. in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you for calling. We appreciate it.
Shirley makes a good point. You know, there are usually more allegations that it used to be said if you wanted to vote multiple times, you needed to move to Chicago, or if you wanted to vote after you were dead, you want to be buried in Chicago. I don't know how true that was. Most of the studies that have tried to track down this have found that there are very, very few instances of this happening. I mean, it would be a federal offense if you purposely cast a vote on behalf of a dead person. So there's a fairly big deterrent there. Some of the accusations, when they looked into them, they said, well, so-and-so is no longer at this address, it was sent to this address. And well, it turns out they had moved to another state. They hadn't necessarily died and continued to vote. So, but I'm not sure what the typical procedure is, but the procedure that she outlines, except in the case, was it of Mark Twain, who said that reports of his demise were premature, that he was still out there. So I would hate for somebody to stick in an obituary to keep me from voting sometime, but I don't think that it has been considered to be a major problem.
Got one more caller we want to get to here. John, you are live on OpenLine. Thank you for calling us.
Thank you.
Go ahead. What's your question?
Yes, Dr. Vile, I assume that you are opposed to the Georgia voting law that just passed, since you're in favor of the national voting law. Are you opposed to the Georgia law?
Thank you for calling. Thoughts on the Georgia law?
I suspect that there are parts of the Georgia law that I would favor and parts of them that I would oppose. I do think that there's been some exaggeration here, probably on both sides, as to, how many people are going to be able to vote under the new law that didn't earlier, and, how much fraud that it's going to permit. I thought when I originally heard the provisions about providing water to people who were waiting in a long line, that seemed a bit excessive to me. We do have laws, and we have a law in Tennessee that was actually upheld by the Supreme Court that says campaigners cannot be, and I can't remember if it was 100 feet or 200 feet, but there is a limit to how close you can be to the voting booth and whether somebody can come up from a party. And that's designed basically to prevent intimidation. So, if there's any chance that workers from either Republicans or Democrats are there trying to put pressure on people, I certainly would not oppose a law, that did that. But if you got somebody waiting out there for 3 or 4 hours in line on a hot day, particularly because it happens to be one of these underserved areas, it seems a little harsh to say that somebody couldn't provide them a glass of water.
When we look at the voting rights bill that had come up that died in the Senate, I mean, is it your sense that most people did support it? I mean, it was a close vote, and obviously with the two Democrats kind of switching sides. I mean, is it with a few tweaks something that could be, still move forward?
Maybe I'm too optimistic. I would hope that there's nobody in the United States who would want to deprive somebody to vote on the basis of race or gender or age over 18. I think we have agreement on that. My primary concern, again, at the moment, is that we do not overly politicize the actual counting of the votes. I don't want another election like 2000 where, we got people holding cards up and, trying to see if there's a hanging chat or not. And, I want it to be as clear cut, whichever, whether it goes for, the party that I'm supporting that year or the other party, I want that to be transparent. And I don't want, and again, I made the comparison earlier to gerrymandering. you talk to a Democrat and they say, well, Republicans do it. And you talk to Republicans and they say, well, Democrats do it. But, no party in the long run is going to prevail, hopefully, in a democracy, in a republic, if they don't actually have the support of a majority of the people. And you can cover it over for a while, and, you got 40% Democrats and they're getting 50% of the vote, or vice versa, but that isn't going to work for very long. So I think there are some cases, and I'm one, and I know a lot of people, this will get some calls for you. I don't see a reason that we need to politicize school board elections. I just don't think I need to know whether you're a Democrat or Republican to know whether or not you are capable of making decisions dealing with the education of children. And I think the more we politicize that, the more dysfunctional we're going to become.
We are going to take another quick break, and we will be back with more Open Line and Dr. Vile right after this. Stay with us.